Hello and welcome back to the Morbid Moonlight 31 Days of Halloween, where all this month we're celebrating the work of esteemed genre icon Felissa Rose. Now, for yesterday's video we took a look at a pair of Felissa Rose anthologies, and today we're going to be doing more of the same, because we're going to be checking out another two Felissa Rose films, those being The Last American Horror Show and Welcome to Hell, both coming to us from the year of 2018. We'll go for Last American Horror Show first, because it's a film that's a little more upfront with its Felissa Rose, because in this one, she's the first person that you'll see on screen. Felissa Rose is in the framing story for this one, along with Marv Blofeld and Tiffany Fest, both of whom are people that she's worked with a lot of times before. Felissa Rose is hooking up with Mr. Marv Blofeld for a date night, and it so happens that this date night involves watching horror films, so that pretty much does away with the framing device. All of the segments here are directed by this guy Mr. Michael Rodriguez, and this is one of those anthologies where each of the episodes in it are basically just repurposed earlier short films that have been bolted together by this quite flimsy framework story. First up, we've got a pretty one-note kind of home invasion story that just kind of comes and goes uneventfully. Next, we've got probably the most technically impressive of the three stories, which is Night of the Sea Monkey, which is this kind of weird monster movie kind of creature feature deal about a flushed away sea monkey that mutates to strike back at the family of this young boy that disposed of it in such a callous fashion. It sounds like quite a basic sort of fun idea, but there are definite moments of nastiness and this kind of general tacky feel to it once the blood starts flying that sort of drags this one down a bit, to be honest. We've also got another performance from Lynn Lowry, who we talked about yesterday with Terror Tales, and this time around she's playing this kind of crazy speaks as she finds grandmother, but she seems a little bit unconvinced by all the mayhem, to be honest. We've also got Mr. Tyler Gallant from Rootwood and others, who turns up and does his John Travolta act. And on the whole, it's kind of fun, but when you get to a certain point, you just realise that Mr. Michael Rodriguez doesn't quite know how to finish this one, and he just kind of goes for that kind of default bloody carnage, with this kind of deliberately ludicrous edge to it all. What it's trying hard to be is something like The Deadly Spawn, but at the end of the day it just isn't. Now, the last story here is called Lamb Feed, and it's basically this kind of very artsy Texas Chainsaw type deal that doesn't really deviate at all from the basic playbook. Probably the most interesting thing about this one is that we've got an appearance from somebody called Mr. Arch Hall Jr., who, if you know, was this kind of young teen heartthrob type in the late 50s, early 60s. He did this film called The Sadist in sort of early 60s that I know has got his fans, but to me, he will always be the guy from the film in which Richard Kiel played a caveman, which was Ega, which is one of those rare kind of quirky low-budget films that's got a lot of heart from the 60s that I've got a real soft spot for. As to what persuaded Arch Hall Jr. to come out of retirement and appear in this short, I don't know. It certainly wasn't the strength of the script, and he's really hasn't got that much to do as this kind of wheelchair-bound crazy, but fair play to Michael Rodriguez for signing Arch Hall Jr. up. I think that just overall, the biggest problem for me is that I really just don't like Michael Rodriguez's style as a director. He puts too much effort into these weird kind of showy-offy experimental jittering, but he kind of forgets the basics. So you end up with some of the worst sound recording I've ever heard in a film, often to the extent where there's scenes where I actually don't know what people are saying. And even though that is a curse of having a low budget, I think there's a certain level where you've got to say, this isn't just a budgetary thing, it's just poor direction. And I think that The Last Horror Show suffers from having this kind of really flat, grubby, cheap look to it, without any of the charm that comes with that, because I feel that Mr. Michael Rodriguez is always trying to throw in some kind of a flourish, when the reality is that he should just be working on basic functional storytelling. Me personally, I've always favoured just straightforward direction over something that's too kind of deliberately self-conscious, and I think that The Last Horror Show just looks poor overall. And I think the framework segments in particular just look really horribly amateurish, even though they've got better actors in them. Sorry, Felissa Rose, but I think that The Last American Horror Show really isn't any better than about a 2.5 out of 10. It's just this kind of grubby, hastily cobbled together collection of anemic, tacky, cheap-looking non-stories. I'd say that this is definitely one that you could do with skipping. So the question is Welcome to Hell a better anthology? Well, technically, yeah, it is, but sadly, it's also fairly poor, and one story in particular sticks in your mind as being very sick and unpleasant. There's 6 stories here which have been glued together with one of the poorest, feeblest framing devices I can think of, which is basically an even shoddier, less convincing version of Last American Horror Show's wraparound, where we've got this kind of mysterious tape that pops through the letterbox of this pair of losers. It's not so much a framing story because it's just bookending the whole run of shorts rather than cutting back to it constantly, but to be honest, it's so shit that it's probably for the best that we don't keep cutting back to it. The first story, After Hours, is about 10 minutes long and it's got one good basic twist in it, but it is pretty pointless. The star of this one is Bill Oberst, who's somebody that I've got a real fondness for. I think he's got this very kind of characterful face, and he's got a nice understated manner to him that always means that I can believe in him as somebody that's actually been through a lot in life, instead of just being your generic bland pretty boy. He's actually the sort of actor who I think would have been at home in 70s stuff, where you had actors that were chosen because they had kind of an interesting or unique look to them. I am a big fan of Bill Oberst, and I don't think that he gets enough love, but he's more or less got nothing to do in this one. But believe it or not, this is actually one of the best segments, and it's basically just this punchline with 10 minutes of Shaggy Dog before it. Next up we've got Slit, which is this kind of artsy lesbian piece that's basically completely pointless, and again, it goes on for about 10 minutes, and there's not even enough material for 10 minutes. Third up, we've got Welcome to the Family, that comes to us from a guy called James Cullen Bressick, and he gives us this really kind of sordid little tale of incest that, in my opinion, just really does stretch the definition of horror quite a bit, and it manages to stick in some really objectionable elements, including this funny punchline about paedophilia that tells you just where our director's coming from, and to me, this is the short that really drags the film down. It's also, I should say, the longest segment. It's about 20 minutes, that means that we get a nice chance to wallow in how fucked up all this is. The thing that is very strange, though, is that the director of this segment, Mr. James Cullen Bressick, is actually the director of the original To Jennifer film, so all I can say is that at least I've had the pleasure of seeing him die horribly on screen. The fourth segment is Dead Therapy, which is at least kind of more straightforward. It's this idea about an Alcoholics Anonymous type therapy meeting for survivors of a zombie apocalypse. And even though it doesn't really go anywhere unexpected, at least there's a basic nugget of an idea there that's fairly intriguing. Story number 5 is just under 4 minutes long, and is a waste of 4 minutes. And that's all that I've got to say about that. And the last story that lasts just under 20 minutes is called Maternal Instincts, and finally, here is our dosage of Felissa Rose. Basically, this is your kind of dead hooker in a trunk type deal. A guy at a bar picks up Felissa Rose and believes that he's accidentally killed her. He phones up his pair of friends to help dispose of the body, but it turns out that she isn't dead, and the three of them have to work out what to do. Weirdly, this is by far the best of the 3 stories because it actually has got some degree of depth to it, and a few twists along the way, even if they are pretty simple. There's this kind of vague Tarantino-esque flair to this one with your wisecracking tough guys and this self-aware approach to the kind of genre aspects, but I think that Felissa Rose gives a really decent performance here. I think the story's a little bit too thin to be any longer than this, but of them all, it's the one that I think I enjoyed the most, and it's good that Felissa Rose actually gets a solid role here instead of just this little cameo. The director of this one is Brad Bruce, and I think that he does a decent enough job, although I can't help but feel that Maternal Instincts really just stands out because the other stories are so lackluster. Still, it is nice that this story's got a sense of humour to it without being deliberately ludicrous and spoofy. I think far too many shorts and anthology segments seem to think that all you really need to do to make a short is to be able to shock your audience, as opposed to approaching a short like an actual film, where it's got ups and downs and this careful balance of different tones to keep your viewer interested. Too many anthologies of recent years suffer from the same problem that plagued the ABCs of Death, which was a film where you had 26 very short shorts and every single one of them was trying to outgross and outshock the other, and there wasn't any real balance because everyone just wanted to be the really shocking one. As with any anthology though, you need a mix of tones and styles and ideas, because horror can be a lot of different things, and with a good anthology you should be able to get a chance to showcase that. Too many modern directors feel like they get impatient if they go for too long without giving you gore, and the thing that always suffers with cheap thrill merchants is, of course, storytelling. Sadly, I think a lot of cheap anthologies these days are really not much fun at all, and rather than getting an interesting mix of different things, what you end up with is badly made hack jobs that just reduce their horrors down to these little slices of nastiness. Honestly though, out of all 4 of these anthologies that I've talked about over the last 2 days, I don't think any of the stories really stand out as being that memorable, and the ones that I do remember the most are the ones that I really hated. I think Welcome to Hell is marginally better than The Last American Horror Show, just because I think technically the shorts in it are better made, and because it's got a much better role for Felissa Rose in much less tacky surroundings. I'm going to go for a nice, big, fat 3 out of 10 for Welcome to Hell. I'd say maybe watch the first story, probably watch the last one, and miss out the rest, and to be honest, even then, you're not going to get anything that's that special. But I think I'm going to wrap this up here for now though. Another day in the 31 Days of Felissa Rose done, almost at the end of this now, and I can tell you that I've got 2 very special videos lined up for the next 2 days for you. I'd love it if you chuck me a comment, give this video a like if that's not too much trouble, and subscribe for some more Felissa Rose fun. Thanks a lot for your time, it really does mean a lot to me, and I shall see you tomorrow for day number 30 of the 31 Days of Felissa Rose, and I'll see you then, alright?